And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. TruthFrequencyRadio.com is our website. And joining us on the line is alternative historian and author Michael Tsarion. He is an expert on the occult history of Ireland and America. Born in Ireland, he's researched the mythologies of the world as well as his own country's magnificent and mysterious druidic history. Michael is just a wealth of information with in-depth research including Atlantis, ancient astronauts, the occult, Irish origins of civilization, mind control, and the Metachild. Thank you very much for coming on, Michael.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be back. Hi, Sherry. How's it going?
Hey, doing great.
You know, I have to say, last year you came on the broadcast, we had 50, 60 listeners, something like that, and you so humbly appeared. And now, over the course of the last year, we've skyrocketed to tens of thousands of listeners worldwide, AM and FM. We're on the AM and FM dials, and I can't help but feel that you played a key role in our success and the success of the show. So I just want to thank you personally for that, Michael.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and you certainly deserve it, of course, you know, and again, my preference is always to come on shows like yours, you know. It's very important that the world hears it in this way as opposed to going on the mainstream, which I have a personal dislike of. So it's far better to have people who know what they're doing, are passionate about what they're interested in, actually do the homework and study rather than just some script that they've been handed by, you know, an anonymous source.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, last time we discussed architects of control, but over the course of the last year, I've realized how important mind control is and what role it plays in our society. And I want to get into the Metachild a bit later in the broadcast, but right now, I want to ask you about a comment from Architects of Control. You read a quote by Jim Keith, and then you said, it's now become a question of who is not mind controlled, but rather who is mind controlled. And I guess that's the big question right there. How can we tell who is mind controlled and who is not?
Well, we got to take it as a given that almost all of us are at some level mind controlled when you understand that mind control starts with a form of auto hypnosis. The mind control that, you know, we addressed, or normally we address in public, tends to be only one kind of mind control. That's because it's of the most interest, it is the most bizarre, it has the most sort of sinister connotations when you're talking about Big Brother and maybe that kind of Orwellian mind control. And of course, we've gone to great lengths to show that it does exist, it has been happening, there is evidence and so on. However, when you really get into mind control in a more broader context, you start to realize that you couldn't have those other kinds of mind control without this auto hypnosis. I've talked about it briefly, I mean really briefly, in other projects. I talked about it this year in June at Conspiracy Con. I tried to address it there. I went into it a little bit more in this age of manipulation talk I did in Europe, but haven't been able to get into it in as much detail as I would like. So I'm glad you asked this question. Basically, the kind of mind, what I think is the most important thing for people to grasp is that mind control would not work. It's not some sort of wizardry, you know, in this sort of Svengali way, or some sort of Star Trek way in which a beam hits you, or the sorcerers are there hypnotizing you, you will obey me, you know, this kind of thing. That is only one small sort of almost Hollywoodish rendering of mind control. And then even when you hear about the famous MK Ultra, I'm sure you all know about that, and I've had many guests on speaking about that. It's fascinating.
Oh yeah.
That again is one kind of mind control. But what interests me much greater than that is this capacity of human beings to auto-hypnotize themselves and adopt belief systems that are irrational. We can argue what they are. Some people would say that's religious beliefs. Others would say, no, it's the idea of collectivism. You know, there's a whole range of what constitutes these levels of auto-hypnotism. That's a huge subject, and that's what fascinates me. But what my real point is that the sorcerers that we address, or that I address in my work, are master psychologists. And they themselves first began to understand that this kind of hypnosis that they're into will work on the human race because they'd already studied what I'm talking about. They realized that the human being naturally auto-hypnotizes themselves. And therefore, they just simply said that we know that our systems will work because there's a natural function and natural ability for human beings to go into altered states of reality, to not face reality as it really is. They already do this. They already do this without even knowing it. So all we have to do is take the basic premise of this, that people are dead scared of reality, don't really face it. They have ideas of reality and work with that. And of course, this is quite well known now to people who study this matter. And therefore, the people who are at the very top of the pyramid started to fund the Chicago Institute, the Tavistock Institute, the SRI, the Hoover Institute, the MK Ultras, the Dr. Delgados, all the Dr. Campbells, all these extremely sinister creatures who are, again, lower henchmen. They're just merely to devise the tools to sort of streamline the idea so that they could do it to masses if need be. But it was all based on the idea of just basic human psychology, based on how the mind works, based on the anatomy of consciousness, based on this, which is what I addressed in the Conspiracy Con talk, and other directed. We want to live in the persona. Our ideas of who we are, when we even use words like the self, very, very abused words, I might add, like self. These words have become invisible by use. We hardly even know what we mean when we say the word self. It's such a deep and a meaningful word. When people use the word I without even really understanding its philosophical depth. So we have sacrificed the I, we've sacrificed the self in order to live in a world in which the pseudo-self exists, which some people would call the ego, and we can argue whether that's a true definition or not. But for just terminology's sake, we live in this pseudo-self, the pseudo-persona, pseudo-ego, and that ego is entirely based on relationships that we have with other people. It's like one mirror reflecting another mirror. This is what we have when we're walking around in society. It's the famous Jungian mask in which we all play this game, and our sense of self is based on how we relate to our parents, our siblings, certainly our schoolmasters, how we relate to the world in general. This is the play of masks, and it has very little to do with the actual self that exists within ourselves, the real self of a person, which is pretty much an invisible thing pushed into the recesses of consciousness, hardly dealt with at all. In fact, if you even try to express it, as we all know, what will happen in society, you'll be marginalized, alienated, very much told that this behavior is not allowable, you must go along to get along, and all the rest of it. So the controllers have noticed this. They've arranged society, and they understand that this magnetism that pulls us outward from our own inner being, out into the play of masks, into the world, works wonders for them, because then they know we don't think as individuals. We don't have a spirit of rebellion. We have a social conscience. And I'm not ruling these things out. I'm not saying they're wrong, but it's been taken too far. And so this is where the hive mind, this is where the collective consciousness, this is where the consensus enters in. And then you only have to find the sort of circuitry of that to be able to control masses of people. We know, for instance, that when you sit down with anyone over dinner, a weekend, a couple of beers, most people will actually start agreeing with you if you start bringing up things about world controllers, the world sucks, things shouldn't be this way, wars are terrible, the government sucks. Most people will sit there and sort of pretend that they do in fact agree with you and work, you get this impression that, yeah, we see eye to eye. But as a matter of fact, then these people get up from the table, walk away, and then, don't want to do anything about it. Why? Because they're under a form of mind control, their own mind control. What can little old me do about the octopus of the World Bank, the IMF, the Euro, the economic community, and the people who run that? What can little old me do to stop a war or change reality or fix things or help my country or bring enlightenment to the world? You see? So we all have this very self-sadistic, masochistic understanding, yet we might verbally go through the motions of saying, yes, I understand that this is a negative thing. Oh, I just wish things were different. But let Alex Jones deal with it, because I haven't got a clue how to deal with this, and I just want to go back and play with my toys and go to work and sit in that cubicle, and I hope it'll all go away. This is one example of this relationship between the controllers hoping that your own littleness, your own incapacity, your own self-sadism and masochism will work for them without them even having to, get up from their desks. It's all a system of programmed auto control.
Well, it makes it even easier for them if you consider the fact that most people don't really reach maturity emotionally. So they're still like a 6-year-old who still believes in Santa Claus, and whose world would be completely devastated if you showed them proof that there wasn't a Santa Claus. So they're basically living their lives tricking themselves into thinking everything is the way it is because that's the way it is, and there's nothing I can do to change it. And
well, people don't even get a chance to go through an emotional puberty because they're putting them on these psychopharmaceuticals earlier and earlier and earlier, and you don't get to feel your emotions or understand them.
That's right. And it also turns out that when people have to make a choice in life, rather than choose to free themselves from slavery in a really authentic way, they'd much prefer to take Big Brother's carrot to become a mini dictator or a petty dictator over others. Says, I won't fight the system, I'll join them. And so that the merest chance, and this goes for Freemasons, and it goes for police chiefs, and it goes for these so-called politicians that are big legends in their own minds, but actually wield very little power. Most of the people that we visually see, that we imagine to be in power, have done that, realizing on some level that to walk the Siddhartha road is all nigh impossible, realizing that to fight the system is, again, nigh on impossible. They then say, give me a few stripes, give me a uniform, and I will serve you. You know, so there's also this, which is don't balk the system, and
it's instilled from the beginning. Let me hold that thought, Michael. We're going to take a quick break. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. TruthFrequencyRadio.com. We are speaking with the legend himself, Michael Tsarion. Now, before the break, we were speaking about the quote-unquote ego, or the fake ego that's been implanted in us, and I totally agree. I mean, from the beginning, we're told that boys are supposed to play with guns, girls are supposed to wear dresses, we're supposed to go to school, be on the football team or the cheerleader team, and get a scholarship, go to college, get a good job with a corporation, retire at 60. Our whole life is planned out, and our whole image is planned out before we're even born. But how do we find that lost sense of self, Michael, with all of this mind control, and how do we get comfortable with the true self?
Well, it's I went into this in various I've really belabored that point, and I almost make it a recurrent motif, and it has to do with a thing called apophatic learning, which is more simply stated as simply negation. The self is not something that you can come upon directly. All the psychologists agree on this point, especially Jung and Freud and the head honchos who really look deeply into the psyche. Of course, they weren't the first. Most of what we know to be psychology today is rooted very much in philosophy of both the modern and the ancient times, or let's even say just going back to the time of Plato. And all these experts really understood one basic fact, and that is that the mind has this critical apparatus, this judgment capability, which of course is being turned right off today. There's a reason for that. And they understood that this comes under the heading of the reason. But the reason works in two ways. One way is, of course, to discover, to analyze, and so on. But one of its other techniques, and it's very, very important in psychology and psychoanalysis, ultimately in spirituality, is to deconstruct, to discover what something is not. And this often helps a lot because some of the most elusive mysteries you're not able to apprehend them directly. You can only apprehend them by negation as to finding out what they're not. This is, again, as I said before, very, very important in psychology when it comes to introversion, soul searching, and trying, as you say, to determine what makes you different than everybody else as opposed to the same. I never rule out that we have certain things in common. We do, and in daily life we should have interactions with other people. We need those. But what my bugbear is that we have used this normal level of extroversion and interest in other people's life, and what I refer to as the entanglement factor in other people's lives. We've used this normal sort of phenomena to lose ourself. We've made it worse than it is. We have what William Blake, the great poet, called mind-forged manacles. We've actually imprisoned ourselves in the light. We've lost ourselves in the world of other people, in our social duties and domestic duties and obligations, and we are sort of hiding out. And therefore, that's why all of the stimuli of our world exists. Again, the world controllers monopolize on this because they've realized that, yet again, by studying human consciousness, the brain and the senses can only take in a certain amount of stimuli. But then if you overstimulate, they know that people like stimuli, it's normal, it's natural, but if you overstimulate, then they know that the mind will shut down just by having a surplus of everything, far too much to concentrate on, too many chic groups, too many cliques, too many opinions, and then it becomes this chaos of voices, this big parliament of opinions and voices in which the reason cannot operate, can't come to a true decision, because for every decision you make, somebody else can rebut it, and we have then this constant back and forth until the mind itself becomes exhausted. And therefore, that's what they're hoping. They hope that we'll have this existential fatigue where questions like, who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing here? may